Alright. Hello, time for another book review. It's the Nook. Yep, it's a Nook book that I have that I finished reading recently. And, come on, turn on. This is a book where I don't have to worry about any copyright violations if I read it. But I'm not going to read it because it's 931 pages. And that's not what I usually do on my channel, is read extremely long books. But I don't need to worry about copyrights if I did decide to read it, because it's the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist Dispute, the original arguments. In other words, it's just reprinting things that were written in right after the Constitution was voted on, 1788, is that around there? There we go. So, of course, in case you don't know, the Federalists were essays written by James Madison John Jay, who later became a Supreme Court Justice. Madison's, did he become president? Oh, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, the fourth one. And I think Hamilton was the third one. And I could have just double-checked. They were in favor of the Constitution and writing essays to convince the states to ratify it. The Anti-Federalist, of course, they were anti, so they were against the ratification of the Constitution. They both had some very similar goals. There wasn't one that was for tyranny and one that was against. The ones for the Constitution thought that the Constitution would not create a tyranny. Yeah, so here's a quick summary of some of the points that the Federalists made. The most powerful point I think they made was to point out how often Europe went to war with itself. The countries within Europe were at war against each other. And by having one national government that was more powerful than the government under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation, in case you don't know, are the laws or the Constitution that governed the 13 colonies after the Revolutionary War until the Constitution that we have now. And, they were saying that we should worry about wars between the states if we don't have a national government. And they were right about that. Think about how many wars Europe has had. Compare that with how many wars America has had amongst itself. Not that many. They were saying it's better for the one national government to deal with the international issues and talking to other countries. And I think they got a good point there. Instead of having, two neighboring states make treaties with countries that are enemies, let's have one unified country. More likely things will be peaceful that way. The Anti-Federalist had some good points. They weren't all, all out on a limb. One of the good points, they were worried about non-slave states, or free states, being forced to accept slavery. There were a lot of people in the colonies that did not want slavery. Some people who hate America lie and make it sound like from the southernmost point of Georgia all the way up to the border of Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire that there was complete agreement on slavery being good, but actually there wasn't. And Rhode Island completely banned slavery. a lot of the other states had banned slavery, and they just pinched their noses and went along with the slave states, so we would have 13 colonies rebelling against England and not 3 or 5 colonies. And so we would get the Constitution ratified and have a nation of 13 states instead of a nation of 6 states or 5 or 7, whatever the number would have been if it was didn't have the slave states in it. They complained that the judiciary had too much power and there was nothing to counterbalance them. And that was a really good point. Those are the two things that I think are the weaknesses to the Constitution, that it did not immediately ban slavery. But to the Constitution's credit, it had some anti-slavery parts to it. For purposes of representation, a slave did not count as a full person. Counting a slave as a full person would have given power to the slave owner and would have given more votes to the slave owners to keep slavery going. And the people are allowed the right to keep and bear arms. This is one thing that Frederick Douglass noticed. You can't have an armed slave. It doesn't work. But the Constitution guaranteed arms. So that's an anti-slavery clause in the Constitution. And the judges, there's no counterbalance. The president can be impeached if he severely misbehaves. The president is limited in doing only what the Congress votes to be law. And the Congress, or the legislature, they get to vote for whatever laws they want, but there's a limit to their power because the president can veto a bad law. And if the president was wrong and it really was a good law, then they should be able to get 2/3 of the legislature to override the veto. So there's that balance there. Somebody can undo what the other one did, but there's nothing like that for the courts. The Supreme Court can come up with a really bad, stupid, immoral decision, and we're high and dry. There's wait until they die and retire and then try to get another Supreme Court to reverse it. Now, the Supreme Court has reversed previous Supreme Court rulings, but it takes 20 or 50 years to do that. That's not a good enough, in my mind, to call a check and a balance on their power, a limit on their power. If what they say lasts for 50 years before the next Supreme Court looks at the case and says, separate but equal? Oh, no, the court was wrong about separate but equal. We're not having that. You know, Brown versus Board of Education was the Supreme Court overruling and changing a previous Supreme Court ruling. Separate but equal is what the Supreme Court said years before Brown versus Board of Education said, no, separate but equal, we're not having that. That's not equal. This, and made their good ruling. Any other way to overturn a bad Supreme Court ruling? Constitutional amendment. And those are hard to do, and they should be hard to do. So there's no check and the balance on the Constitution. One of the arguments that they made that definitely had some traction was there's no Bill of Rights or listing of what the government's not allowed to do to limit them. And one reason I can say that got traction is we have a Bill of Rights. We have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution because extremely soon, within a couple of years, after the Constitution was ratified and the government came into being, they put those Bill of Rights in there that the Anti-Federalists were saying should have been in there to begin with. the Anti-Federalists did have some bad logic, I could see, and some bad arguments sometimes. After listing or enumerating what Congress had the power to do, Congress is the only one that has powers. The President doesn't get to make a law. He just has to work on enforcing the laws Congress makes. So that's one limit on his power. And the Congress is limited in what they can do to things on this list that's in the Constitution. The last clause says to make laws necessary and proper. Let's see, to execution, to bring to execution the powers, the foregoing powers. And that clause just means Congress gets to do whatever needs to be done to enact the things already listed. See, it's limiting, because it's only to do the powers, execution of the powers already listed or given them in the Constitution. It does not give them a blank check to do anything. It does not give them the power to do anything. For example, they are given the power to raise armies and navies. Well, how can you have an army and a navy if there's not a department of the army and the navy, or army recruiters, or army bases, or an agency or department to procure supplies for the army and navy? So that's what that does. Patents, as one of the patents and copyrights are one of the powers of the Congress, one of the powers listed in the Constitution. So that means that last clause that the Anti-Federalists were blowing way out of proportion means they get to make any law that's necessary and proper to enact the patents and the trademark powers that the Constitution gives them. It does not mean they can create the agency of the dissolving of the states. No, it means that they get to make a patent agency to process the patents. Get that agency some buildings to work in. That's all that means. Yeah, the Anti-Federalists accused the king of being a tyrant with unlimited powers. No, he didn't have unlimited powers. Yeah. And yeah, the Anti-Federalists in some of the essays said that the Constitution established an aristocracy, and we would have an aristocracy ruling over us. But it doesn't, establish an aristocracy. So, and my general thoughts, Constitution is a good thing. I have to say that, because God said so. Joseph Smith Jr., God's true prophet, was asking about something, and the Lord told him that he suffered the Constitution, suffered wise men to be raised up to make the Constitution. So, in general, the Constitution is a good thing. For the most part, it's a good thing. It should have banned slavery at first. It should have put a check and a balance on the courts. But other than those things, the Constitution is a good thing. Thank you for watching. You have a good day.